Now we are going to discuss salivary glands. Salivary glands are divided into major salivary glands and minor salivary gland, and you must be knowing that parotid, submandibular and sublingual, these are major salivary glands and there are minor salivary glands. Okay, now see what kind of acini are present in the major salivary glands and minor salivary glands. So if you're talking about acini, what kind of acini is present in parotid gland? So in parotid gland there is only serous acini. So what kind of? There is only serous acini. What kind of acini is present in submandibular gland? So in submandibular gland there is presence of both serous as well as mucinous acini. And if you're talking about sublingual gland and minor salivary glands, in sublingual and minor salivary glands there is only mucinous acini. So in submandibular gland there is both serous plus mucinous acini, and in sublingual gland and in minor salivary gland, sublingual gland and in minor salivary gland there is only mucinous acini. Okay, so this is related to acini. Now what are the names of the duct of major salivary glands? Now see, this is the parotid gland and this is the duct of parotid gland. So this is the duct, and what is the name of duct of parotid gland? It is Stenson's duct. So the name of duct is Stenson's, and where it is going to open? It is going to open near upper second molar. So the Stenson's duct is going to open near upper second molar. So what is the location of opening? Near upper second molar. Okay. Now here you can see this is submandibular gland, and you can see this is the opening of submandibular gland. What is the name of submandibular gland duct? So submandibular duct is known as Wharton's duct. Name is Wharton's duct. And where it's going to open? So it is going to open at papilla just lateral to frenulum. So what is this location? It is going to open at papilla just lateral to frenulum. Clear? And here you can see this is the sublingual gland, and these sublingual glands are having multiple ducts. So what are the names of ducts? It is the duct of Rivinus and Bartholin's ducts. So for sublingual gland, duct of Rivinus and Bartholin's duct. So you have to remember, duct of parotid gland is known as Stenson's, submandibular gland is known as Wharton's, and for sublingual gland it is duct of Rivinus and Bartholin's duct. Now coming to minor salivary gland, approximately what's the number of minor salivary glands? Approximately there are 750 minor salivary glands. So see, the minor salivary glands, approximately the number is 750. Okay. What is the location of minor salivary gland? So minor salivary gland is seen in the lip, buccal mucosa, retromolar area and hard palate. So the locations are, it is seen in lip, it is present in buccal mucosa, retromolar area and hard palate Clear? So these are important points related to anatomy. So in salivary gland, what are the risk factors for salivary gland tumors? So see the list of risk factors. Risk factors for salivary gland tumors. Okay, whenever radiotherapy is given to head and neck, it's a risk factor for mucoepidermoid carcinoma. You must be knowing that the mucoepidermoid carcinoma is the most common radiation-induced malignancy of parotid or salivary gland. So whenever we give radiotherapy to head and neck, and it is going to increase the risk of mucoepidermoid carcinoma. Second, Epstein-Barr virus infection. Epstein-Barr virus infection increases the risk of lymphoepithelial carcinoma. So it's Epstein-Barr virus infection Clear? And it is going to increase the risk of lymphoepithelial carcinoma. Okay, so lymphoepithelial carcinoma. Then exposure of silica dust nitrosamines, exposure of silica dust nitrosamines. Okay, these are going to increase the risk of salivary gland tumors. Early MENAC and nulliparity also increases the risk of salivary gland tumors. It means that salivary gland tumors are more common in males or females. If early MENAC and nulliparity is a risk factor, so it is more common in females. So you will see most of salivary gland tumors are more common in females except Warthin's tumor, because Warthin's tumor is more common in males. So other risk factor is early MENAC and nulliparity. Okay, trisomy 5 and translocation of chromosome number 11, it's going to increase the risk of mucoepidermoid carcinoma. So trisomy 5 and translocation involving chromosome number 11, these two are the risk factors for mucoepidermoid carcinoma. These are risk factors for mucoepidermoid carcinoma. Polysomy 3 and 17, these are risk factors for adenoid cystic carcinoma. So polysomy 3 and 17, and these are the risk factors for adenoid cystic carcinoma. Clear? Adenoid cystic carcinoma. So this is the list of risk factors for salivary gland tumors. Now we are going to discuss the one-liner questions which are frequently asked related to salivary gland tumors. First, what's the most common salivary gland tumor? And it is pleomorphic adenoma. What's the most common malignant salivary gland tumor? It is mucoepidermoid carcinoma. Now see, in children, what's the most common neoplasm of salivary gland? In children, it's hemangioma. And what is the most common malignant tumor of salivary gland in children? And then it is mucoepidermoid carcinoma. And if we are talking about minor salivary glands, most common malignant tumor of minor salivary gland, and that is adenoid cystic carcinoma. So these are one-liner questions. Have a look. First, what is the most common salivary gland tumor? Clear? And overall most common salivary gland tumor is pleomorphic adenoma. It's pleomorphic adenoma. Simple. Now see the twist. Most common malignant salivary gland tumor, and this is mucoepidermoid carcinoma. So this is mucoepidermoid carcinoma. Okay. Now in children, most common neoplasm of salivary gland in children. So most common neoplasm of salivary gland in children. Clear? It's a bit different, and you have to remember this is hemangioma. It is hemangioma. Clear? And what is the most common malignant tumor of salivary gland in children? Then again it is mucoepidermoid carcinoma. So most common malignant tumor of salivary gland in children, and this is mucoepidermoid carcinoma. Mucoepidermoid carcinoma. Clear? And the most common malignant tumor of minor salivary gland, it is adenoid cystic carcinoma. Right? So most common malignant tumor of minor salivary gland. Clear? and this is adenoid cystic carcinoma. This is adenoid cystic carcinoma. Okay, these are the one-liner questions. Now see, certain important points by which you can easily crack the questions. See, most of the salivary gland tumors are located in which gland? Yes, it is parotid gland. So how you have to remember? All salivary gland tumors are more common in parotid except two. Which one? First is adenoid cystic carcinoma, which is more common in minor salivary gland, and second is squamous cell carcinoma, which is more common in submandibular gland. Otherwise, if you see pleomorphic adenoma, it is more common in parotid. Wardens tumor, mucoepidermoid carcinoma, acinic cell carcinoma, these three are exclusively seen in parotid. And if you see lymphoma and metastasis to salivary gland, so lymphoma and metastasis, this is also more common in parotid. Why? Because of rich lymphatic network of parotid. So important point, all salivary gland tumors are more common in parotid. More common in parotid except clear. First is adenoid cystic carcinoma, and this adenoid cystic carcinoma, it's more common in minor salivary gland, we discussed. And the second is squamous cell carcinoma, this is more common in submandibular gland. This is seen in minor salivary gland. Clear? So what are the tumors? What are the salivary gland tumors which are more common in parotid? Yes, list is C. Pleomorphic adenoma. Pleomorphic adenoma, it is more common in parotid. And if you see Wardens tumor, clear. Mucoepidermoid carcinoma, acinic cell carcinoma, Wardens tumor, mucoepidermoid carcinoma, acinic cell carcinoma, these three are exclusively seen in parotid. Clear? So these three are exclusively seen in parotid. Clear? And after that, lymphoma and metastasis. Why? Because of rich lymphatic network. So lymphoma and metastasis. Clear? So all these are more common in parotid. Second important point which we discussed, that all salivary gland tumors are more common in females except Wardens tumor, and Wardens tumor is more common in males. So these are the general important points which are frequently asked. Now see how we are going to make the diagnosis of salivary gland tumors. So generally in salivary gland tumors, the investigation of choice for diagnosis is FNAC. Why we avoid biopsy, especially in parotid tumors? Because if you go for open incisional biopsy of parotid tumor, what is the problem? There is seeding of needle tract. So what happens? The tumor cells are going to seed the tract. And second problem, if the duct is injured, there is parotid fistula. So investigation of choice for diagnosis, it is FNAC. And best imaging for salivary gland tumor. So we discussed that in head and neck malignancy, when there is complex soft tissue relations and overcrowding of soft tissue, in these cases MRI is preferred. So that's why best imaging for salivary gland tumors is MRI. So two important points. First, what is the investigation of choice for diagnosis of salivary gland tumors? And that is FNAC. Okay, and what is the best imaging for salivary gland tumors? And that's MRI. Clear? Why we avoid biopsy, especially the open incisional biopsy? The open incisional biopsy it should be avoided, especially in parotid. So why? Because there is tumor cell seeding in tract. Why? Because there is tumor cell seeding in the tract. And second, there is increased risk of parotid fistula. Why? When the parotid duct is injured. So increased risk of parotid fistula, and that's why we avoid the biopsy. So this is the basic protocol. Now see the risk of malignancy in salivary gland. So what happens? The risk of malignancy in salivary gland is inversely proportional to the size of gland. So risk of malignancy is inversely proportional to the size. So if you're talking about parotid, here 50% tumors are benign and 50% tumors are malignant. Now see, in cases of salivary glands, the risk of malignancy is inversely proportional to the size of gland. Parotid is largest, that's why here the risk of malignancy is lowest. That's why you will find that 75% tumors in the parotid are benign, only 25% are malignant. In submandibular gland and sublingual gland, 50% tumors are benign and 50% are malignant. And in cases of minor salivary gland, 25% are benign and 75% tumors are malignant. This data is from Schwartz and Sebastian. The data of Bailey is a bit different. So see, very important point in relation to salivary glands, what? Risk of malignancy. In salivary glands, risk of malignancy is inversely proportional. Inversely proportional to the size of gland. Okay, so first see, what's the risk of malignancy in parotid? So in parotid, incidence of benign tumors, benign and malignant. So in parotid, you notice that 75% tumors are benign, only 25% are malignant. Okay, in submandibular gland and sublingual gland, in these 50% tumors are benign and 50% are malignant. See, this data is from Schwartz and Sebastian. And in minor salivary glands, what? 25% tumors are benign and 75% are malignant. Now, how we treat the salivary gland tumors? Here, the principal treatment is surgical excision. So what? We have to go for surgical excision. Sometimes we give radiotherapy also. And in certain patients, we have to go for neck dissection whenever the patient is having involvement of cervical lymph node or there is high grade tumor. So surgical excision, mainstay of treatment. It can be given alone or in combination with radiotherapy. We go for neck dissection. Chemotherapy is having limited role in two malignancies. Which one? One is thyroid malignancy and one is salivary gland tumors. So chemotherapy is of very little help in salivary gland tumors. So see the treatment options. For salivary gland tumors, what are the treatment options or management options? Okay, so first, the principal treatment option is surgery. So surgery is the principal treatment. Clear? And generally, sometimes we are just going for surgical excision. So we are going to perform surgery alone, or sometimes we give radiotherapy. So surgery plus radiotherapy. Now what kind of surgery? For example, if in the parotid there is involvement of only superficial lobe, so we go for superficial parotidectomy. If there is involvement of deep lobe, we go for deep lobe parotidectomy. And if there is involvement of both lobes, in that case we go for total conservative parotidectomy, where we preserve the facial nerve. And if there is involvement of facial nerve, then we go for removal of whole parotid with excision of facial nerve. So this is known as radical parotidectomy. So these are the surgeries which are performed. And if patient is having tumor in some other gland like submandibular, sublingual, minor salivary gland, so we go for en bloc excision of tumor with gland. Clear? So this is the surgery. Second treatment option is what? Neck dissection. Neck dissection. So in which cases we are going to perform the neck dissection? Obviously, if there is clinically palpable lymph nodes. So if there is clinically palpable lymph nodes, or patient is having high grade malignancy. So patient is having high grade malignancy. Okay. Third treatment option, radiotherapy. So in which cases we give radiotherapy? This is a famous question which is asked almost every year in relation to head and neck. So what are the indications of radiotherapy? Now see, whenever the primary tumor is large, it's of high grade, there is involvement of cervical lymph node, there is involvement of nerve, means there is perineural invasion, there is bone invasion, or there is positive margins. So in all these cases we go for radiotherapy. So what are the indications of radiotherapy? You have to remember: high grade tumor, high grade tumor. If there is large primary tumor, so there is large primary tumor, there is perineural invasion, perineural invasion. Clear? What else? There is invasion of bone, so bony invasion. Okay. Whenever we perform surgery and the margins are positive, it means still tumor cells are left. In that case also we go for radiotherapy, so positive margins. And whenever there is cervical lymph node metastasis or involvement of cervical lymph node, so cervical lymph node metastasis. Clear? These indications are frequently asked, you have to remember, and it's easy. High grade tumor, large tumor, involvement of nerve, involvement of bone, involvement of lymph node, and whenever you remove tumor and positive margins are there. So in these cases we give radiotherapy. We discussed that chemotherapy is having very little role. So chemotherapy is having limited role in thyroid malignancy and salivary gland tumors. Clear? It's having limited role. So generally we don't use chemotherapy. So in salivary gland tumors, what's the problem with chemotherapy? There is incomplete short-lived response and there is no survival advantage. So what's the problem here? Why we are not using in salivary gland tumors? Chemotherapy is having incomplete and short-lived response. And if it is incomplete and short-lived response, clear, that's why there is no survival advantage. And if there is no survival advantage, we should not use it. Clear? So we don't use chemotherapy in salivary gland tumors, right? These are the management options for salivary gland tumors. One by one we are going to discuss. First we are going to discuss what are the incisions in parotidectomy. So during parotidectomy, what are the names of incision? Can you see this? So this is looking like S. What kind of S? Lazy S. So this is lazy S incision. Can you see here? So this is lazy S. There are other incisions. One is modified Blair's and third is cyst trunk, not operation, incision. So incisions used in parotidectomy, the names are lazy S incision, modified Blair's incision, and cyst trunk incision. You have to remember. Clear? And sometimes they ask image based question. They give these images and they ask that what is the name of this incision. So lazy S, modified Blair's, and cyst trunk incision. Now we are going to discuss the types of parotidectomy. So first of all, you have to understand the anatomy, which is very, very easy. Now in this diagram, you have to focus on the facial nerve. So what can you see? This is the facial nerve. Clear? This is facial nerve. Now see, there is some salivary tissue which is located lateral to facial nerve, and there is salivary tissue of parotid which is located deep or medial Clear? So the salivary tissue which is located lateral or superficial to the facial nerve, that is superficial lobe, and the salivary tissue which is located in the lobe deep to the facial nerve, and that is deep lobe. So here you can understand. So this is superficial lobe and this is deep lobe in relation to facial nerve. Another structure which is a landmark for identification of facial nerve, and that is retromandibular vein. So can you see here? So this is retromandibular vein. So what you have to understand here, relation of facial nerve, superficial lobe is superficial to facial nerve and the deep lobe is deep. Okay, so here you can see clearly that this is the facial nerve, and here you can see this is the superficial lobe and this is the deep lobe. Clear? So in superficial parotidectomy, we are just removing the superficial lobe. It is also known as lateral parotidectomy, also known as classical parotidectomy. And whenever tumors are involving deep lobe, we are removing the deep lobe of parotid, and that is known as deep lobe parotidectomy. Clear? Remove superficial lobe in superficial parotidectomy, deep lobe in deep parotidectomy. When a tumor is involving both superficial and deep lobe, and you remove the whole parotid gland, but you preserve the facial nerve. So if we preserve facial nerve and remove superficial and deep lobe, this is known as total conservative parotidectomy. And if the tumor is involving facial nerve also, you remove superficial lobe, deep lobe with facial nerve. This is radical parotidectomy because we excise the facial nerve. And what is extended radical? When we are going to remove some muscle, surrounding muscle, mandible or temporal bone. So removal of adjacent structures like mandible, temporal bone and some muscles, this is extended radical parotidectomy. So we are going to discuss the types of parotidectomy. So first is superficial, also known as lateral, also known as classical parotidectomy. Clear? So in this case, the salivary tissue lateral to facial nerve is removed. It is done for which tumors? It is done for tumors involving superficial lobe. Clear? And what we are going to remove? We remove the salivary tissue. We remove salivary tissue lateral to facial nerve. Clear? So salivary tissue lateral to facial nerve is removed. Now see second is deep lobe parotidectomy. So what's this deep lobe parotidectomy? So it's common sense question. The tumor is involving which lobe? So here the tumor is involving deep lobe. So it is performed for tumors involving deep lobe. Simple. And here we are going to remove the salivary tissue located deep to the facial nerve. So remove the salivary tissue located deep to facial nerve. Clear? So salivary tissue located deep to facial nerve is removed. This is deep lobe parotidectomy. Then there is total conservative parotidectomy. Why conservative? Because we are preserving facial nerve. Why? Because it's not involved and the tumor is present or involving both superficial and deep lobe. So total parotid is removed. So this is known as total conservative parotidectomy. Clear? And in total conservative parotidectomy, we are going to remove, since the tumor is involving both superficial as well as deep lobe. Clear? So we are going to remove both. So in this case, facial nerve is preserved. Facial nerve is preserved and whole parotid is removed. Clear? So both superficial and deep lobe, it is removed. And the tumors in which there is involvement of facial nerve also. So we are going to remove the parotid along with facial nerve. So this is radical parotidectomy. So what's radical parotidectomy? So here, tumor involves facial nerve, and since tumor involves facial nerve, we have to excise the facial nerve apart from removal of parotid. So what we do? In this case, we remove whole parotid, clear, plus we perform excision of facial nerve. Excision of facial nerve. Simple. So this is radical parotidectomy. And what is extended radical? So with radical parotidectomy, if we remove the adjacent structures, so when we remove adjacent structures like mandible, like temporal bone, adjacent muscles, clear? So this is extended radical parotidectomy. Extended radical parotidectomy, clear? So these are the types of parotidectomy frequently asked in exam. Now whenever we are performing parotidectomy, there are certain landmarks for facial nerve. So what are the surgical landmarks for facial nerve? One, we discussed that retromandibular vein. Now see, what are the surgical landmarks for facial nerve? We discussed one, retromandibular vein, that is one of the surgical landmark for facial nerve. What are the other landmarks? So if you see this picture, what? There is styloid process. You can see it's a landmark. You can see this is the facial nerve. So see the relation. Styloid process. Tragal pointer, it's a landmark. Posterior belly of digastric. We discussed retromandibular vein, and there is tympanomastoid suture, which is the most constant landmark. So here you can see this is the main trunk of facial nerve, clear? And you can see this is the tympanomastoid suture, clear? So tympanomastoid suture is the most constant landmark for facial nerve. So see, what are the surgical landmarks for facial nerve? Surgical landmarks for facial nerve. Okay. So we discussed. First is styloid process. There was styloid process. Tragal pointer. Clear? Tragal pointer, tympanomastoid suture, retromandibular vein, and posterior belly of digastric, clear? So posterior belly of digastric. And this question was asked in NEET. What was the question? That what is the most constant landmark? And the most constant landmark is tympanomastoid suture. So this is most constant landmark. Simple. So how to remember? It's very easy to remember, and the mnemonic is strap. So you can see strap. S means styloid process, T tragal pointer, tympanomastoid suture, RA that's retromandibular vein, and P that's posterior belly of digastric. So these are the landmarks. Whenever we are going to perform the parotidectomy, there are complications. You have seen in the post-operative period, some patients are going to develop facial nerve paresis, which is temporary, and some patients are going to develop facial nerve paralysis. So facial nerve paresis and paralysis. And there was one question in AIIMS that a patient after parotidectomy, when he was doing shaving, patient noticed numbness, and this numbness or sensory impairment is because of excision of which nerve? So it is because of excision or injury of greater auricular nerve. There can be Fraze syndrome or parotid fistula. So these are the complications. So what are the Complications of parotidectomy. Complications of parotidectomy. Clear? So first, there can be facial nerve paresis or paralysis. Paresis or paralysis. Simple. There can be sensory impairment, or in AIIMS this term was there, numbness. So sensory impairment or numbness. What's the cause? Because of excision of greater auricular nerve. You have to remember, because of excision of greater auricular nerve. Clear? There can be Fraze syndrome. We will discuss in detail because this is favorite topic of AIIMS people and NEET PG people. Fraze syndrome. And if duct is injured, if the parotid duct is injured, it can lead to parotid fistula. So it can lead to parotid fistula. Clear? These are the complications. Most important, which is frequently asked, is this Fraze syndrome. What is the other name of Fraze syndrome? It is also known as auriculotemporal syndrome, also known as gustatory sweating. So what is the problem here? See, for parotid, the secretomotor fibers are relayed via auriculotemporal nerve. Via parasympathetic system, the secretomotor fibers are going to parotid via this auriculotemporal nerve. And what happens? Sympathetic system is going to supply the cheek or the skin over the parotid, which is going to supply the sweat glands. So whenever during surgery the nerve fibers of auriculotemporal nerve is injured, what happens? There is aberrant cross innervation between the fibers of auriculotemporal nerve and the sympathetic fibers. So whenever there is autonomic stimulation because of food, because of smell of food, so what happens? There is excessive sweating over the parotid region during eating or when patient is sensing or smelling the food. So that's why it is known as gustatory sweating. So we are going to discuss in detail Fraze syndrome. Fraze syndrome is also known as auriculotemporal syndrome. Auriculotemporal syndrome. It is also known as gustatory sweating. Gustatory sweating. Clear? So see, this auriculotemporal nerve, it carries the parasympathetic secretomotor fibers to parotid. So it contains parasympathetic secretomotor fibers. Clear? To parotid. Okay, so there are sympathetic fibers. Okay, and these sympathetic fibers are going to supply the sweat glands. So here you can see the problem. This is the sweat gland and this is the parotid. Clear? This is the parasympathetic fibers and these are the sympathetic fibers. It's normal, but whenever because of surgery there is aberrant cross innervation, so what will happen? Can you see certain fibers are attached to the parasympathetic and it is going to relate to the sweat glands. So whenever there is autonomic stimulation, whenever patient is having something, is eating something, there is smell of food, there is activation of this parasympathetic system. But what is the problem? Because of this activation there is sweating over this cheek region, especially over the parotid. So what is the problem here? In these patients there is aberrant cross innervation. So what is the problem? There is aberrant cross innervation. Clear? And that's why what are the clinical features? So on tasting food or smell of food, so on tasting food or smell of food, what happens? There is sweating and erythema at parotid region. So sweating and erythema. So there is sweating and erythema at parotid region. Simple. So how we are going to make the diagnosis? Diagnosis is made by minor starch iodine test. So diagnosis is made by Miner's starch iodine test. Now see how we are going to treat this condition. Since there is increased sweating or sweating during meal, so we can apply what? Antiperspirants. We can go for Botox injection, or in severe cases we can go for tympanic neurectomy. So what are the treatment options for Freiss syndrome? We can go for antiperspirant application. We can go for Botox injection. Clear? And in non-responding cases, we can go for tympanic neurectomy. So the third option we have, and that's tympanic neurectomy. Clear? For non-responding cases. So this is how we manage the patients of Freiss syndrome. Next complication which can occur, and it is frequently asked, and that is parotid fistula. Okay, this parotid fistula can be external or it can be internal. If the patient is having internal parotid fistula, the patient is asymptomatic. Why? Because the secretions are going to open in the oral cavity. But in external parotid fistula, it can arise from the gland or it can arise from the duct. When it is arising from the duct, generally it is going to open somewhere over the cheek. Why? Because the external opening is very close to the upper second molar. And when there is external opening over the cheek, there is secretion. And because of this secretion, there is excoriation around the external opening. So what are the types of parotid fistula? It can be internal and it can be external, right? Internal fistulas, these are asymptomatic. External fistula, either it is arising from what? The gland. So there is pinpoint opening here overlying the gland, or it is arising from the duct. And if it is arising from the duct, because of secretions, what happens? There is excoriation in the surrounding. So external fistula, it is of two types, arising from gland or arising from duct. Now see what are the risk factors. So the conditions in which there is injury to the duct, what happens? There is fistula. So whenever patient is having parotid abscess and it is ruptured, or there is parotid abscess and you performed incision and drainage, during that you injured the duct. So what are the risk factors? Risk factors for parotid fistula. So first, rupture of parotid abscess. Okay, or we go for incision and drainage of parotid abscess. Because of that there is injury. Sometimes it is injured after superficial parotidectomy. So injury of duct after superficial parotidectomy. And whenever there is penetrating trauma to parotid. So what? Penetrating trauma. So if there is penetrating trauma, now see the clinical features. So the gland fistula, it's pinpoint. So generally it's pinpoint and it closes spontaneously. So there is spontaneous closure. In which one? In this one, gland fistula. And whenever there is duct fistula, we discussed that there is external opening over cheek. So what happens? There is excoriation of skin. There is excoriation of surrounding skin. So it is a fistula. So if a patient is having fistula, we inject the dye in fistula and we take the X-ray. So that is known as fistulogram, but this is salivary gland. Here we inject the dye and take X-ray. This is xylogram. So what's the investigation done? Here how we make the diagnosis. It is diagnosed by xylogram. Okay. And the question which is asked, that what is the name of surgery performed for parotid fistula, and this is known as Neumann-Seebrock's operation. So this is Neumann-Seebrock's operation, and this is the name of surgery which is performed for parotid fistula. Now we are going to discuss pleomorphic adenoma, and you know that pleomorphic adenoma is the most common salivary gland tumor. What is the most common site of pleomorphic adenoma? It is the parotid, and in the parotid which lobe? Superficial lobe or tail of parotid. See, pleomorphic adenoma can arise from other salivary glands also. So it may arise from submandibular gland, sublingual gland and minor salivary gland. So see the important points first. It's the most common salivary gland tumor. And what's the most common site? So obviously it's the parotid. And in parotid, what's the most common site? It's the tail of parotid or superficial lobe. So if the most common site is superficial lobe, what should be the treatment of choice? Superficial parotidectomy. So most common site parotid. In parotid, it is the superficial lobe or tail of parotid. It's the tail of parotid. Other sites, it can arise from sublingual gland, submandibular gland, even from minor salivary gland. Okay. Now see, there are questions related to pathology. There is other name of pleomorphic adenoma, and what is the other name? It is also known as mixed tumor. So why it is known as mixed tumor? Because it is having both epithelial and mesenchymal component. So why it's known as mixed tumor? Because it is having both, there is both epithelial as well as mesenchymal component. Clear? So this is related to pathology, epithelial as well as mesenchymal component. Second important feature of pleomorphic adenoma, see, this tumor is having finger-like projection or pseudopodia-like growth. This is finger-like projection or pseudopodia-like growth. And if the tumor is having this kind of finger-like projection or pseudopodia-like growth, what is contraindicated? Enucleation. Because if we go for enucleation, what will happen? There will be some remnant of the tumor or some projection which is left inside. And what is the problem? There is recurrence. So another important point, that it's having finger-like projection. Finger-like projection, and it's also known as pseudopodia-like growth. So this is pseudopodia-like growth, and because of this pseudopodia-like growth, what is contraindicated here? Enucleation is contraindicated. Why? Because if we go for enucleation, what happens? It can lead to recurrence. So this enucleation is contraindicated. Now see the location of the tumor. If you see this location, this is typical. So see the location. It is located in front, below and behind ear lobule. See the location. So tumor is located in the parotid region. Where exactly? In front, below, behind ear lobule, pushing it up. Clear? So clinical features. So tumor is located in front, below and behind ear lobule. Behind ear lobule, pushing it up. Okay, pushing it up. Clear? It's a benign tumor. It's having slow growth. Sometimes, see, it is most common site is superficial lobe. Sometimes tumor is arising from deep lobe, and if it is arising from deep lobe, it is going to push the fascial pillars and tonsils towards the midline. And that's why if pleomorphic adenoma is arising from deep lobe, pushing fascial pillars and tonsils towards midline, this is known as dumbbell tumor. So what is dumbbell tumor in relation to pleomorphic adenoma? So this is deep lobe tumor. This is a deep lobe tumor. And what's the problem here? Pushing fascial pillars and tonsil towards midline. That's why it is known as dumbbell tumor. Okay, now coming to the diagnosis. So we discussed for most of the salivary gland tumors what is the investigation of choice. So FNAC, most common site of the tumor is parotid. Which lobe? Superficial lobe. So what is the treatment of choice? It is superficial parotidectomy. And we discussed that whenever salivary gland tumor is located in some other salivary gland like submandibular, sublingual, minor salivary gland, in those cases we go for excision of involved gland. Okay, so diagnosis here, investigation of choice for diagnosis, and that's FNAC. And treatment, if it's arising from parotid, so tumor is arising from parotid, so that's why what's the treatment of choice? It's the superficial parotidectomy. Simple. And whenever the tumor is arising from submandibular gland, sublingual gland, or minor salivary gland, in these cases we go for excision of involved gland. So excision of gland. Clear? This is how we treat it. Now there are certain complications. Rarely there is malignant change occurring in pleomorphic adenoma. And if there is malignant change in the pleomorphic adenoma, it is known as carcinoma X pleomorphic adenoma. Pleomorphic adenoma is known as mixed tumor. So if there is malignancy, this is known as malignant mixed tumor. So what are the complications? Complications. First is malignant change. In pleomorphic adenoma, there is malignant change. Clear? So the name of this malignancy is carcinoma. It's known as carcinoma X pleomorphic adenoma. Clear? Pleomorphic adenoma is known as mixed tumor. So if there is malignant change, so it's also known as malignant. It's also known as malignant mixed tumor. Okay, now see, pleomorphic adenoma is benign tumor. It is having slow growth. So whenever there is malignancy, what happens? There is sudden increase in the size of swelling. Means there is rapid growth, there is pain, there is paresthesia, and the malignancy is going to involve the facial nerve. So there is facial weakness. There is malignancy, so there is involvement of cervical lymph node. There is fixation of mastoid tip. So all these are the findings suggestive of malignancy. What is the second problem? Whenever the surgeon is going to perform enucleation, the second complication is recurrence. So in which cases recurrence is going to occur? Whenever enucleation is done. So if enucleation is done, clear? So if enucleation is done, it can lead to recurrence. So these are the two complications seen in pleomorphic adenoma. There is one tumor which is exclusively seen in parotid, exclusively, and it is more common in males. What's the name of this tumor? It's Warden's tumor. So very, very important, favorite question of AIIMS people. It's Warden's tumor. What are the other names of Warden's tumor? It is also known as papillary cyst adenoma lymphomatosum. So see the first name. It is known as papillary cyst adenoma lymphomatosum. Clear? So just break the term. Here you can see that this tumor is having papillary cystic pattern. Papillary cyst adenoma. So there is papillary cystic pattern. Second, the tumor is cystic. And here you can see lymphomatosum. So this tumor is having lymphoid component. So there is papillary cystic pattern. There is a lymphoid component, and generally this tumor is cystic. What is the other name? It is also known as adenolymphoma. So it's also known as adenolymphoma. Okay, adeno means there is epithelial component and lymphoma means there is lymphoid component. Clear? So there is epithelial component, okay, and lymphoma, it means there is lymphoid component, right? Sometimes the location is not typical, sometimes it's typically not seen in the parotid region, and it is said that this tumor is derived from salivary inclusion tissues of lymph node. What do you mean by this? Imagine that this is a lymph node, okay, and in this lymph node there are salivary inclusion tissues, and the tumor is arising from these salivary inclusion tissues of lymph node. That's why what's the name? Adenolymphoma or papillary cyst adenoma lymphomatosum. So it is derived from salivary inclusion tissues of lymph node. Clear? We discussed what is the most common salivary gland tumor. It's the pleomorphic adenoma, and most common site is parotid. What is the second most common tumor seen in parotid? And it's the Warthin's tumor. So Warthin's tumor is second most common parotid tumor. It's benign, exclusively seen in parotid. Benign, exclusively seen in parotid. Clear? We discussed most of the salivary gland tumors are more common in females, but this is more common in males. Two special properties. It is more common in males, it is more common in smokers, and in 10% cases it's bilateral. Now see how it looks like. So here you can see this patient is having bilateral Warthin's tumor. Can you see? So patient is having bilateral Warthin's tumor. It's benign. That's why this tumor is having slow growth. Okay. And what kind of tumor is there? It is cystic. So see the clinical features. The tumor is having slow growth and it is cystic. Clear? It is well encapsulated. The tumor is well encapsulated and there is no malignant change. So in this tumor, there is no malignant change. How we make the diagnosis? Obviously, investigation of choice for diagnosis is FNAC. Now the question which is frequently asked related to Warthin's tumor, that this tumor shows hotspot on technetium-99 per TechNet scan. Rest other tumors show cold spot. So important point related to diagnosis. First, what is the investigation of choice for diagnosis? FNAC. You know this fact. And this tumor shows hot spot. You have to remember this was asked many times in AIIMS. Hot spot on technetium-99 per TechNet scan. Per TechNet scan. Clear? These two questions are frequently asked. Clear? And what is the treatment of choice? It's a benign tumor, so we go for superficial parotidectomy. So see the treatment of choice is superficial parotidectomy. Okay, so these were the benign tumors. Now see the list of malignant tumors. First, most common malignant tumor of salivary gland. And most common malignant tumor of salivary gland in children, it's what? Mucoepidermoid carcinoma. So this is mucoepidermoid carcinoma. Clear? And we discussed that radiation exposure to head and neck increases the risk of mucoepidermoid carcinoma. So this is most common radiation induced neoplasm of salivary gland. So very important point, this is the most common radiation induced neoplasm. Okay, of salivary glands. Simple. Now just break it. Mucoepidermoid carcinoma. So it is mainly consist of two cells. Muco means mucin secreting cells and epidermoid means epidermoid or squamous cells. So mucin secreting cells and epidermoid or squamous cells. So if mucin secreting cells are going to predominate, yes, if it's predominant, it is low grade mucoepidermoid carcinoma, and if epidermoid or squamous cells are predominant, this is high grade mucoepidermoid carcinoma. You know that this low grade mucoepidermoid carcinoma is more common in children, whereas high grade mucoepidermoid carcinoma is more common in adults. So see what are the types on the basis of cells: low grade and high grade. Clear? So this low grade mucoepidermoid carcinoma, it is seen in children, more common in children, and high grade, it's more common in adults. Here in children, so what's the predominant cells in low grade mucoepidermoid carcinoma? Here, mucin secreting cells. Mucin secreting cells, these are predominant, and in high grade it is epidermoid cells. And what's the other name of epidermoid cells? It is also known as squamous cells. It is squamous cells. The low grade carcinoma, it is well differentiated, and high grade is poorly differentiated. This is poorly differentiated. Now coming to the treatment. So what is sufficient? Either superficial or total parotidectomy is sufficient for low grade mucoepidermoid carcinoma. But for high grade mucoepidermoid carcinoma, we have to go for total parotidectomy plus minus, means sometimes we require radical neck dissection. So what's the treatment? So in low grade, we can go for superficial or total parotidectomy. So what is the treatment for high grade mucoepidermoid carcinoma? It is total parotidectomy. So this is total parotidectomy plus minus, may sometimes we perform radical neck dissection. Clear? So this is how we manage mucoepidermoid carcinoma. There is another malignancy which is exclusively located in parotid. Why? Because it resembles normal acini of salivary gland. So if it resembles normal acini of salivary gland, what should be the name? It is acinic cell carcinoma. So it's a rare malignancy. Acinic cell carcinoma. Okay. So the name is acinic cell. Why? Because it resembles normal serous acini of salivary gland. Okay, it's a rare malignancy, exclusively seen in parotid. In parotid, it is exclusively seen in parotid. What is the problem here? That this tumor or this malignancy is going to involve the lymph nodes. And what is the good thing? That it is encapsulated. So this tumor is encapsulated, but it tends to involve the regional lymph node. So there is involvement of regional lymph node. Okay, and that's why what kind of excision is done? We go for radical excision. So what's the treatment? The treatment is radical excision. Okay, so we go for radical excision in acinic cell carcinoma. What is the most common malignant tumor of minor salivary gland? Sublingual gland, submandibular gland, and it is adenoid cystic carcinoma. Overall, if you see the incidence, most common malignant tumor of salivary gland, mucoepidermoid, and the second most common malignant tumor of salivary gland is adenoid cystic carcinoma. Okay, so see important points related to this malignancy. Adenoid cystic carcinoma. This malignancy is favorite of examiners. That's why you will get either one question in surgery or in pathology. So first and very important question, it's the most common malignant tumor of minor salivary glands. Okay, submandibular gland and sublingual gland. And we discussed, if you see the overall incidence, it is the second most common malignant salivary gland tumor. Now see what is the location of this tumor. Can you see? If you see, the most common site of this adenoid cystic carcinoma is hard palate, and what is the second most common site? Is the sinonasal tract. So what's the most common site? You can see here, most common site is hard palate. This question was also asked, followed by sinonasal tract. Sinonasal tract. Now see the questions related to pathology. What is the most common type? It's the cribriform variety, and this cribriform variety is having Swiss cheese pattern. Clear? So most common type, this is the question which is asked, and it's the cribriform variety. And this cribriform variety, it's having characteristic pattern known as Swiss cheese pattern. Swiss cheese pattern. Okay. Now see other important properties which are asked in exam. What is the location of this tumor? Most common site is hard palate, followed by sinonasal tract. Clear? This tumor is having special property of perineural invasion. And this tumor is having skip lesions. So if it is having special property of perineural invasion, you tell me what is the most commonly involved nerve? Obviously facial nerve, followed by trigeminal nerve. So the most commonly involved nerve, facial nerve, followed by trigeminal nerve. Second important property, that this tumor grows along the Haversian system of long bones. It grows along the Haversian system of long bones. And third important property, that it is known as trachyerous tumor. Why it's known as trachyerous tumor? Because this tumor looks benign, but actually speaking, tumor is malignant. So see the special properties. These are frequently asked in exams. First, this tumor is having perineural invasion, and there are skip lesions. With skip lesions, it means if you go for the biopsy and the site of nerve is negative, there is no tumor, it is not giving you guarantee that nerve is not involved. So perineural invasion with skip lesions. So question, most commonly nerve involved. Clear? And it's the facial nerve, followed by trigeminal. So facial nerve followed by trigeminal nerve. Clear? Whenever there is perineural invasion or involvement of nerve, these tumors are having pain. And since facial nerve is involved, what happens? There is facial nerve paralysis. Second important property, the tumor grows along Haversian system. It grows along Haversian system of long bones. Clear? And third important property, that it is also known as trachyerous tumor. Why? Because tumor is malignant, but it looks benign. So tumor is malignant, but it looks benign. So what are the symptoms? Since there is involvement of nerve, there is pain, there is facial nerve paralysis. This tumor is having high risk of distant metastasis. And what is the most common site of distant metastasis? It is not brain, it is lungs. So see the clinical features. In these tumors, there is pain, there is facial nerve paralysis, there is high risk of distant metastasis. So question, most common site of metastasis. And the most common site of metastasis is lungs. It's not brain. This is the point where you do the mistake. It's lungs. Now see, what is the investigation of choice for diagnosis? So investigation of choice for diagnosis is FNAC. But what is the radiological investigation of choice to assess early perineural spread and intracranial extension? So obviously which investigation? MRI. So two important questions related to investigations. Investigation of choice for diagnosis, and that's FNAC, And second important question, radiological investigation of choice for detection of early perineural spread. For detection of early perineural spread and detection of intracranial extension. Clear? And what's that investigation? It's MRI. It's MRI. Clear? Now, what is the precaution which we should take during the excision of tumor? So obviously, whenever we are going to perform the surgery, we have to excise the tumor with widest cuff of normal appearing tissue around the tumor. Why? Because these tumors are having skip lesions. So if you are not going to take sufficient amount of normal tissue with tumor, what will happen? Recurrence. And second thing which we do, that in post-operative period we have to give radiotherapy to prevent or to avoid the recurrence. So what's the treatment here? Here we go for excision with widest cuff of normal tissue. So excision with widest cuff of normal tissue. Why? Because there are skip lesions and we have to give post-operative radiotherapy plus post-operative radiotherapy. Why? To prevent the recurrence. Now see the important anatomical relationships of submandibular gland. So here you can see this is the superficial or inferior surface of submandibular gland, and you can see it is in close relation to facial artery, facial vein, which one? Anterior facial vein. So close relation with facial artery, anterior facial vein and marginal mandibular branch of facial nerve. So these are the important anatomical relations. Okay, now see further close relations. This diagram is very important. It is asked in both surgery and anatomy. That's why you have to understand as well as you have to remember the facts. Now see, this is the submandibular gland and you can see this is the duct, Wharton's duct. Now you can see there is close relation of Wharton's duct with which nerve? Lingual nerve. And what you can notice here, that this lingual nerve is going to hook the duct. So Wharton's duct is hooked by lingual nerve. One. Now can you see there is another nerve which is in close relation to submandibular gland. So see the questions related to this anatomy, that what are the two most commonly injured nerve during submandibular gland surgery? So what's the most commonly injured nerve during submandibular gland surgery? So obviously it is what? Lingual nerve followed by hypoglossal nerve. So the most commonly injured nerve, it's lingual followed by hypoglossal. Okay, one question. Now see the another question. Silolithiasis. Silolithiasis means stone in the salivary gland. So silolithiasis is most commonly seen in submandibular gland. 80% salivary gland stones are most common in 80% of salivary gland stones are going to occur in submandibular gland. Why? Because the secretions of submandibular gland are viscid. So there is viscid secretion in submandibular gland. And second problem, can you see that this Wharton's duct, it is hooked by lingual nerve. So because Wharton's duct is hooked by lingual nerve, leading to impaired drainage, and what kind of secretions? Viscid secretions. That's why 80% of salivary gland stones occur in submandibular gland. So we are going to discuss the silolithiasis or salivary gland stones. So we are going to discuss silolithiasis, which is also known as salivary gland stone. Two important points. First, 80% of salivary gland stones, yes, these are going to occur in submandibular gland. Okay, and another very important point, that 80% of salivary gland stones are radio-opaque. So two important points. 80% of salivary gland stones occur in submandibular gland, and 80% of salivary gland stones are radio-opaque. Okay, see the composition. So the composition of salivary gland stone, it is composed of calcium or magnesium phosphate or carbonate. So it can be calcium phosphate, calcium carbonate, magnesium phosphate, magnesium carbonate. So what's the composition? Calcium or magnesium phosphate or carbonate. Why it is more common in submandibular gland? We discussed why. Because of viscid secretions, and you noticed that lingual nerve, it is going to hook the Wharton's duct. So what is the problem? Wharton's duct, it's hooked by lingual nerve. Okay, so hooked by lingual nerve. Simple. Now see the anatomy and see the clinical features. So this is the anatomy. The stone can occur in the gland. So stone can occur in the gland, clear, or stone can occur in the duct. Okay, so stone can occur in the gland or the duct. So anywhere the stone is there, what is the problem? There is impaired drainage. So stone is going to cause the obstruction to the drainage. Whenever patient is having food or patient is having meals, what's the problem? There is increased secretion of saliva. But what is the problem? Since there is obstruction to the drainage, during meals, patient is going to complain of pain and swelling in the upper part of neck. So what happens? There is pain and swelling typically appears during meals. Now see, sometimes the stone is in the duct, and if the stone is in the duct and it is impacted, it is going to irritate which nerve? Lingual nerve. And because of irritation of this lingual nerve, there is referred pain to the tongue. So what are the clinical features? Easy to understand. There is pain and swelling. Pain and swelling. Where exactly? In submandibular region. Clear? So typically appears during meals. And second, there is referred pain to the tongue. So why there is referred pain to tongue? Because of irritation of lingual nerve whenever there is impacted stone. So these are the clinical features. Now how we are going to make the diagnosis? Since it is radio opaque, so investigation of choice for diagnosis, it's the NCCT. You have to remember NCCT. If you remember, in ureteric colic also we discussed what is the investigation of choice? Non-contrast spiral CT in ureteric colic, and here for silolithiasis it is non-contrast CT, NCCT. Now see, the management depends on the location of stone. Imagine that stone is here, where in the duct? Imagine this is the gland and this is the duct. Clear? So if the stone is located in the duct, what we do? We are going to give the incision over the duct, and after giving incision over duct, what we are going to do? We are going to remove the stone. So we give incision over duct and we remove the stone. We are not going to close the incision. Why? Because if you are going to close the incision, it leads to stenosis. So just incise the duct, remove the stone, leave it as such. And if patient is having stone in the gland, in that case what we go for? We go for excision of gland. So see the management. So when stone is located in the duct, so stone in the duct, in that case incision over duct. So we give incision over duct and removal of stone. Removal of stone. Okay, we don't close the incision, otherwise it will lead to stenosis, right? And whenever stone is in the gland, so stone in submandibular gland, so in that case we go for excision of gland. Excision of gland. And now comes the question, what's the most commonly injured nerve during excision of submandibular gland? And the most commonly injured nerve, it's the lingual followed by hypoglossal. Most commonly injured nerve is the lingual followed by hypoglossal. Now tell me, what is the diagnosis? What you can see here that there is cystic swelling in the floor of mouth. It is bluish, so it resembles frog's belly. And can you see, it is lateral to midline. This is frenulum, so it is lateral to midline. Cystic swelling, bluish appearance, resembles frog's belly. So what's the name of this condition? This is ranula. So this is ranula, very, very important. Okay, so this is ranula. It resembles frog's belly. Why? It's bluish, resembles frog's belly, and it's cystic. What is the location? Located in floor of mouth. It is in relation to which gland? It is in relation to sublingual gland. Okay, now see, what's the problem? Ranula can be both mucus extravasation cyst and mucus retention cyst. What is extravasation? See, because of trauma or because of rupture, whenever there is spillage of mucin, and because of spillage of mucin, what happens? It is lined by granulation tissue or fibrous tissue. So this phenomena is known as mucus extravasation phenomena, and the cyst is mucus extravasation cyst. Sometimes there is obstruction of the duct and there is retention of secretions. This is known as retention cyst. So ranula can be both mucus extravasation cyst as well as mucus retention cyst, but most commonly it is mucus extravasation cyst. Clear? You have to remember that this is most commonly mucus extravasation cyst. Okay, in many books it's wrongly written that it is mucus or it is retention cyst. No, it can be both, but most commonly it is mucus extravasation cyst. So what's the problem here? There is mucus extravasation phenomena. It is associated with mucus extravasation phenomena. So what is the problem here? There is extravasation of mucus or mucin. Why? Because of local trauma or rupture, and this extravasated mucin in the surrounding tissue, it is lined by granulation tissue or fibrous tissue, leading to this cyst that's known as ranula. Okay, so see the clinical features. Here we can see what's the location. So it's located in the floor of mouth. What kind of swelling? You can see it is cystic swelling, generally unilateral or bilateral. So this is generally unilateral. And what kind of appearance? Frog's belly. So this is bluish. So can you see? And it is painful or painless? So it is painless, and you can see the shape. It is painless and dome shaped. So it's painless and dome shaped. Clear? So located in the floor of mouth, unilateral, cystic, bluish, painless, dome shaped. So how you are going to make the diagnosis? So you are going to make the diagnosis clinically. So we make the diagnosis of ranula clinically. So it is diagnosed clinically. Clear? Now see how we are going to treat it. We are going to perform the marsupialization. What is marsupialization? This is the ranula. You give incision over the cyst. So for cystic swelling, you give the incision, and after giving the incision, what? The content is sucked and the wall is sutured to the surrounding. Clear? So this is marsupialization. How it's done? So here you can see, first we are giving the incision over the cyst, dome of the cyst. After that, what we are going to do? The walls of the cyst are sutured to the surrounding. So I'm going to suture the walls of the cyst to the surrounding. So this is known as what? Marsupialization. So after marsupialization, suppose there is recurrence, in that case what should be done? Then we should excise the gland. Which gland? Sublingual gland, because ranula is a cystic swelling in relation to sublingual gland. So what's the treatment? Here you can see we perform marsupialization. Okay, and if there is recurrence after marsupialization, we go for excision. We go for excision of sublingual gland. So this is how we manage the ranula. Now see, there is another type of ranula in which there is intraoral component with cervical prolongation. So there is intraoral component with cervical prolongation. So this is known as plunging ranula. So in this ranula, you can see there is intraoral component. This is intraoral component, and here you can see that this is the cervical prolongation. Can you notice the swelling in this region? So intraoral component with cervical prolongation, and this is known as plunging ranula. Okay, just now we discussed ranula, and we discussed that ranula can be both mucus extravasation cyst or retention cyst. It can be both, but most commonly it is mucus extravasation cyst, and plunging ranula is exclusively mucus extravasation cyst. So this is exclusively mucus extravasation cyst. Exclusively. Okay, and here you notice what, again it is arising from which gland? So it is arising from sublingual gland. So now see, this swelling is having intraoral component. So there is intraoral component with cervical prolongation, and any swelling which is having this kind of presentation means intraoral component and cervical prolongation. What should be the shape? And it is dumbbell shaped. Clear? So this is dumbbell shaped. Rest of the features are almost similar like ranula. So it is bluish, it is painless, soft, fluctuant, dome shaped. Yes, lateral to the midline. Now see how we are going to make the diagnosis. Since it is having cervical prolongation, we need ultrasound or MRI for complete diagnosis. So what is required in diagnosis? Ultrasound or MRI is required. Ranula diagnosis was made clinically, but here we require ultrasound or MRI because there is cervical prolongation. In this case, since the swelling is in relation to sublingual gland, you have to excise the gland. Apart from excision of the gland, you have to aspirate the fluid from the sac. So what's the treatment? Treatment is excision of sublingual gland and aspiration of fluid. Aspiration of fluid from the sac. Clear? So this is how we are going to manage the plunging ranula. So this is all about salivary glands.